Once again, this is the Understanding CAB, SCSF, and the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit webinar. And today I'm going to be giving you a brief introduction to CAB, or well, I guess to all three of those things mentioned in the title. First off, my name is Robert Shoemate. I'm a developer support specialist here at Telerik. I specialize in WinForms, CAB, and SCSF. If you've had any questions early on in your experience with Telerik, and you've perhaps emailed us at some point, that may have gone through me if it's been a WinForms question. If you're interested in contacting me, my email address is shoemate@telerik.com. You can also access my blog at blogs.telerik.com/robertshoemate, and there I tend to post many of my WinForms related articles, and I've posted several CAB and SCSF related tutorials there as well. And also, if you're interested, you can contact me on Twitter as well at ShoeRob. Brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. First, we'll be going over the Smart Client Software Factory, what exactly it is, and what's included with it. Following that, we'll be going over the Composite UI Application Block, and that is basically an internal building block included with the Smart Client Software Factory. Following that, we'll be going over the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit, and after that, I'm going to show you a pretty extensive programming example of how to build an SCSF CAB-based application from the ground up that's been enabled with the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. After that, I'll give you some resources that you can go to if you want to expand your knowledge on this subject a little bit more. And finally, we'll do a little Q&A. First off, what is the Smart Client Software Factory? Well, basically, it's a plugin for Visual Studio. It's actually a guidance package for Visual Studio, and it assists you in developing smart client applications. And it does this through a series of, I guess it does this through several application blocks and libraries that are included with it. It also modifies some of the Visual Studio UI, and through context menus, you can actually generate components of your applications with it. What's included with it? Well, several application blocks and libraries. It includes the Composite UI Application Block, which we'll be going over pretty soon. It also includes a disconnected service agent, an endpoint catalog, connection monitor, and it also includes the Enterprise Library developed by the Patterns and Practices team at Microsoft, and this allows support for security, exception management, logging, and data access. And along with that, the Smart Client Software Factory also includes several code generation recipes. And these include code generation recipes for adding views, WPF views, disconnected service agents, event publications, and event subscriptions. There are also several templates included with the Smart Client Software Factory, such as the overall solution template, templates for business modules, and functional modules. Included with the Smart Client Software Factory are several frequently used common patterns, and you'll notice some of these as we begin to work with it here in a minute. And to help you get started, there are several quick starts included with the SCSF, and they're the ideal starting point for just gaining a basic understanding of what exactly its purpose is. Included with that are several how-to topics, which are just step-by-step instructions for implementing the recommended practices included with the SCSF. And finally, there's also a bank branch client sample application included with it as well. And this is just basically an application you can reference if you're new to CAB and you need something to reference. So what is the Composite UI Application Block? Well, basically, it's a reusable source code based component that's actually included as part of the SCSF. And it's based on the composite pattern, which means it handles a lot of the user interface components for you when creating a smart client project. Included with it is several things for the user interface and shell, such as base classes for model view controller and model view presenter pattern style implementations. It also comes with several workspaces, and a workspace is basically a user control / component that encapsulates a particular visual way of displaying a control. And I'm going to show you how to use those here in a bit. And also included with the user interface and shell pieces are the UI extension sites. And a UI extension site is basically like a menu or a toolbar that you can extend from somewhere else in your application. And on top of that is also included is the command pattern. And this basically allows business logic developers to separately define actions that users can take in specific areas of the application. And I'm going to show you how that works as well. The Composite UI Application Block also features a modular design of business logic, and this is done through the use of work items, the event broker, and state. And work items are basically a way to encapsulate specific use cases within your application, typically using the model view controller or model view presenter style pattern. The event broker provides a many-to-many loosely coupled event system between objects in your application. And the state is actually, it's just like a cache for storing temporary information in your application that can be shared between components. CAB is missing something. It has all of those great features, but out-of-the-box support for it is restricted to the common Windows controls. This means that it does not include support for the RadControls. You can't use RadControls as workspaces, and you can't use RadControls as UI extension sites. You have to add support for this manually. And this can be very time consuming and very difficult to learn how to do. Luckily, Telerik foresaw this, and that's why we created the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. The Telerik CAB Enabling Kit provides a seamless integration of the RadControls with CAB, and it includes Workspaces, UI element adapters, command adapters, and CAB application classes. Basically all of the things you need to get started. It's also open source, which means if there's a component that is not yet supported and you take it upon yourself to manually add that support, you can submit that code to us for possible inclusion in a future release. It's also fully supported by Telerik, so if you do run into any problems or you have any questions about the TCEK, you can feel free to contact us and we'll try to support you as best we can. So what does the TCEK support? Well, it supports a couple of common workspaces, such as the Rad dockable workspace, and this is basically a wrapper for the docking manager. It also supports the Rad tab workspace, which is kind of like a wrapper for the Rad tab strip. And it also supports a number of UI extension sites, including the Rad Menu, the Rad tool strip, the Rad panel bar, and the Rad tree view. So now I'm going to give you a demonstration of how to build an SCSF/CAB application from the ground up using the TCEK. The first step we're going to need to take is to create the smart client solution. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do that. I'm going to hop over here to my virtual machine that I have Visual Studio running on. Go ahead and close that. So before we create an SCSF application, I'm going to go ahead and show you what our final product is actually going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and click Run on this application here. Go ahead and change the startup project. And click Run once again. It should be up here in a few seconds. Let's give it a couple more seconds. A few more seconds to go. Takes a bit to compile since it's on a virtual machine. Alright, so here's the application we're going to be making. It's very simple, and I wanted to keep it simple so that we can just focus on exactly what we're going to need to do to use the TCEK with CAB. So basically it includes a Rad Menu as a UI extension site, a Rad Toolbar as a UI extension site, and it's also using the Rad tab workspace to hold this Rad grid view, and it also has a details view where you can view information that you currently have selected in the Rad grid view. So this is what we're going to be making. As you can see, you can add new assets and remove assets from it, and depending on what you click on, it shows up over here. So let's go ahead and get started now and create our SCSF application. So to do that, I'm just going to open up a new copy of Visual Studio, and from the menu I'm going to go ahead and select New Project, and I've previously installed the SCSF and integrated it with Visual Studio, and at the end I'll tell you the link you can go to actually get a copy of that for yourself. So once in the New Project dialog, I'm just going to select Smart Client Development, and Smart Client Application for C# is going to be the project. And the name of it is going to be Asset Manager. And to create it, I'll just click OK. And it should pop up with another dialog here in a second. And this dialog gives me information about the project that is going to be generated for me, and some different options that I can change on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Finish because I'm going to use all of the default options. And over here to the right, you'll now see that the Solution Explorer expands as the SCSF generates several projects for me. And I'll go over what each of these projects is with you so that you understand what they're for. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window, and I'll go ahead and unexpand all of these different items. So here are 5 projects that the SCSF has generated. We'll start with the shell project. What's that for? Well, the shell project is the actual Windows-based application of the Smart Client that contains the configuration and actual main form that hosts the shell layout. So if we expand this, here's the main form of our application, and also includes the app config and a profile catalog XML file. That's another type of configuration file I'll be going over soon. So the infrastructure.interface file, or let's go over the infrastructure.layout. This project is a project SCSF creates for you if you selected that you want to put the shell's layout into a separate module. And that was actually one of those checkboxes on the dialog previous to this. It contains a smart part, which is this user control, and a presenter, which is this file right here, to define the shell's layout. So the layout of the shell is actually in this user control. So if I double click that, let's take a look at it. Inside of here is a regular Windows menu and a regular tool strip, and it also includes 2 deck workspaces, which are basically like stacks of controls. You can push controls in on top and then pop them off the top when you're done seeing them from elsewhere in your application. So the next project is infrastructure.interface, and this defines interfaces for the basic services included with the SCSF. So if we expand the services folder, you can actually see all of those different interfaces that are included with the SCSF. And I'm not going to be going over these today, but once you download the SCSF, it actually includes some pretty extensive documentation for these. So if you're interested in exploring all of them, feel free to go right ahead. The next project is infrastructure.library, and infrastructure.library basically just contains the implementations of all of those services defined in infrastructure.interface. And finally, infrastructure.module. This project is actually a CAB-based module that SCSF where you can add your own infrastructure services. You should only add services here that are used by the entire Smart Client application. So let's go ahead and hop back over to the PowerPoint presentation now. So we've created the Smart Client solution. The next step we're going to take is to update that solution to use the RadControls. And we're going to be using the Rad Menu, the Rad Toolstrip, and the Rad Tab Workspace. So let's go ahead and update it now. I'm going to switch back over to the virtual machine, and I actually have another project that I'm going to be using that I've included a few files that we don't need to recreate during the webinar. So I'm going to close this out and switch over to that project. So here's the project I've created previously. It just contains the same exact projects, just with a few files I've added. That'll be going over soon. So let's update this to use the RadControls. The first step we're going to take is to update the main shell form. So I'll go ahead and update that now. If we take a look at it real quick, as you can see, it's just a single form that contains a deck workspace. So let's update this to be a Rad form instead of a regular Windows form. So I'm going to close that out, and I'll just go ahead and add a couple references to this project first. For the Rad form, I'll need a reference to Telerik.WinControls and a reference to Telerik.WinControls.UI. So once that references dialog pops up, I'll go ahead and add those. So I'm going to select .NET, and then I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom where the Telerik controls are. I'm going to select Telerik.WinControls.UI and Telerik.WinControls and click OK. And now that those references have been added to my project, I can simply right-click on the shell form. I'll view its code, and here at the top you can see that it's inheriting from the standard Windows form. I'm just going to change it to inherit from the Rad form now, and I'll go ahead and resolve that, and then click Save and close that out, and that form is now ready to go. The next step we're going to take is to update the main layout, which is inside of infrastructure.layout. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the shell layout view in the designer, and we'll go ahead and delete these old Windows controls and replace them with the ones that we actually want to use. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and undock the split container control so that we have some more room to work with. And I'll go ahead and delete the main menu strip and the main tool strip. And now from the toolbox, I'm going to drag out a Rad menu and a Rad tool strip. So here's the Rad menu, and I'm going to drag out a Rad tool strip as well. And here's the Rad tool strip. And for these two workspaces down here, I'm not going to be using the right workspace. We're actually just going to be using one workspace in this application, so I'll go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to undock this workspace right here and actually get rid of that split container as well, because we don't need it either. And now I can go ahead and just redock this in the parent container. So let's update the Rad menu now. The first step we need to take is we're going to actually just rename it to the previous name of the menu that was here before, so that any code in the code behind can just use that same exact variable name. So I'm going to call it main menu strip. And the next step I'm going to take is to update the menu. I'm going to add the file option back. So I'll just type file up here in the menu, and I'm going to add a new menu item for exit as well, since that was one of the menu items that was there previously. So I'll just go ahead and call that exit now. And since the menu item was here previously, that also means there was an event available for it. So if we go look at the events now, I could just go ahead and set that click event to onFileExit, and now the Rad menu is ready. So let's update the Rad tool strip now. So I'm going to delete this first section here because we're not going to need that. And let's go ahead and rename the Rad tool strip element to the previous name of the control that was here before. So I'm going to call this underscore main tool strip. And I'll click Save. And let's update some code in the code behind now. So I'm going to just right click and select View Code. And here at the top in the constructor of the shell layout view, you can see that it's assigning workspace names from a workspace constants file to the actual deck workspaces included in the layout. We deleted the right workspace, so we're no longer going to need that code. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. Let's scroll down here a little more. Here's a property that returns the main menu strip. We're actually returning a Rad menu now instead of a menu strip, so I'm going to change that to be Rad menu. I'll go ahead and resolve that. And if we scroll down a little more, here's the code that's returning the tool strip. And we're actually returning a Rad tool strip element now, so I'll go ahead and change that as well. So let's go ahead and run the application now and see if all of these changes that we have made work. So I'll go ahead and click Run. It's going to go ahead and compile. It compiled successfully, so we'll wait a couple more seconds for the application to pop up. And oh no, we got an exception. But I knew this was going to happen. Let's take a look at what the exception was. I'm going to click View Detail, and I'll go ahead and expand a few of these inner exceptions. And here's the exception that occurred. The exception says no UI element adapter factory register for type Telerik.WinControls.UI.Rad Menu. The reason that this exception occurred is that the SCSF does not support the RadControls by default. We actually have to use the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit to add that support. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to stop the application, and let's go check out the website for the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. The address for the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit is telericcab.codeplex.com, and once on the page, you can actually click the downloads link to download whatever version of the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit you need. But more importantly, here on the main page, there's an extensive product description, some documentation links, and down here at the bottom, there are actually several links to tutorials that I've posted in my blog about the different components that are available in the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. So if you need any help, I suggest coming to this page on CodePlex and scrolling down to the bottom and checking out these various links. So I've actually gone ahead and downloaded the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit to my local machine. So let's check out what comes with it. Here it is in my project or my resources folder. So here's the actual download. It's this file right here. And this folder contains its contents. So the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit includes a finance application, which you can use as a reference example. It also has help, samples, and it has a main CMH documentation file as well. The most important thing that we're going to be focusing on is the source code to the TCEK. So if we look in the source code folder, there's actually a telerik.cab.winforms folder, and this contains the actual project for the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit, and this is what we're going to be using. And to use this, you simply need to copy and paste it in the source code of your project directory and include it in your project. And I've taken care of the copying and pasting step, so all I need to do is add it to my solution file. So to do that, I'm just going to switch back over to Visual Studio now, and I'll right-click the source folder, and I'm going to select Add Existing Project. And here in the source folder of my project, I have the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit available, and I'm just going to select the project file for it, and now it's been added to my project. I need to add a few references to it as well from my various infrastructure projects. Infrastructure.layout needs a reference, so I'm just going to right-click it, select Add Reference, and once that pops up, I'm going to add a reference to the project, telericcab.winforms. The shell project needs a reference as well, so I'll just right-click that and select Telerik CAB WinForms. The module project does not need a reference, so we don't need to worry about that one. Infrastructure.library needs a reference, so let's go ahead and update that to have a reference. And finally, infrastructure.interface needs a reference as well, so let's go ahead and update that file to reference it. I'm going to do a quick build now to make sure everything is in order. And the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit is now included with our project. Our project is not yet CAB enabled. We actually are going to do that now. Adding the TCEK project does not automatically enable it for you. You actually have to come open up the infrastructure.library project, and inside of the Smart Client application file is where we're going to enable our project to use the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. So I'll go ahead and view the source code for that. Here at the top, the Smart Client application is actually inheriting from Form Shell application, which is one of the default things included with SCSF and CAB. So if we look at the Telerik CAB WinForms project, there are actually a few new applications that we can use. The one that we're going to be using is Rad Form Shell application. So if we come back to the Smart Client application code file, we can just simply change this to be Rad Form Shell application, and I'll resolve that and click Save. And now if we build again, our project is now TCEK enabled, and we can use all of the RadControls. So let's switch back to the shell layout view, and I'm actually going to delete this deck workspace, and we're going to replace it with a Rad tab workspace, since we have the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. So I'm going to select that and hit delete. And from the toolbox, up here at the top, I now have a new toolbox section for the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag out a Rad tab workspace. And I will dock that as well. I'm going to change the dock property down here in the properties window. And we'll also need to rename that to be the previous name of the workspace that was here before, so that the code behind just automatically picks up on it for us. So we'll change it to _left workspace. So let's try running the application one more time to see if everything is in order. So I'll just click the run button, and it should be up here in a few seconds. A couple more seconds to go and it'll be here. And there's our CAB application. It's been Telerik CAB enabled, and includes a Rad menu, a Rad tool strip that we can't really see right now, and it is also using a Rad tab workspace. So let's hop back over here to the presentation once more. So the next step we're going to take is to create our main data service, and we're going to call this the asset service. And a service is basically a supporting class that provides functionality to other areas of your project. So I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio once again. And I've actually created that service in advance, and I'm just going to show you how I've set it up. So inside of infrastructure.interface, which we discussed before, inside of the services folder, I've created an iAsset service interface for my service. And if we look at this, it just basically contains two methods. One method, getAssets, that returns a set of predefined assets for me to work with, and the saveAssets method, which will just save those back to whatever source they came from. And inside of the infrastructure.library project, or inside of the infrastructure.module project, is the actual implementation for this service. So if we open that up, as you can see, it contains the implementation of those two methods that I was talking about. But more importantly, at the top, it has this service attribute. This basically specifies that this is an infrastructure service, and I can use this attribute. I can use another attribute to retrieve this service elsewhere in my application. And here inside of the service attribute, I've also specified that this is a service of type iAsset service. And this is the identity that I'm actually going to use to retrieve this service elsewhere in my application. So that's basically how our service is going to work. So let's hop back over to the presentation one more time. So the next step we're going to take is to create a module. We're going to create the asset listing module. And a module contains views, support services, and business logic and configuration information for specific business use cases that you need to program in your application. So let's switch back over to Visual Studio now. So to create a module, the first step I'm going to take is I'm going to right-click this modules folder right here. And the Smart Client Software Factory has actually been integrated with Visual Studio, so I now have the Smart Client Factory menu option, and it includes some context-sensitive options, and in this case it is allowing me to add business modules or foundational modules. And I'm going to add a business module for C#, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And let's call this the Asset Listing Module. So I'll name it that, and I'll click OK. And it's going to pop up with a dialog that explains the projects it's going to create for me, and it's going to give me a few options. I don't need an interface library for this module, so I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this option. And now I'll click Finish. And here's our module. A module basically is comprised of views, services, and constants specific to this module. So there's also a starting point for any module that you add to your SCSF project, and this is through the module.cs file. So if we open this up, you can see that it's inheriting from module init, which is the base class for a module, and it's creating a work item, and on that work item it calls run. Well, the work item is actually this file right here, modulecontroller.ces. So if we open that up and take a look at the run method, the run method is actually calling add services, which is where we can add local services for this particular module. It also calls extend menu and extend toolstrip, and those are the two methods we'll use to extend our main UI extension sites, the Rad Menu and the Rad toolstrip. And it also calls the add views method, and this method is what we're going to use to add views to our central Rad tab workspace. And just one more thing I want to show you inside of one of our infrastructure projects and the shell project, the profile catalog XML file that I was referring to earlier. Inside of this file is basically just definitions for all of the different modules and assemblies that should be included with your SCSF project once it starts up. And down here, when we generated that module, it actually added a line of code for us that specifies that that new module is to be included with the shell once we start the application up. And that's how it knows to call this run method inside of here. So the next step we're going to take is to create the asset listing view. And this is going to be the central view for this module. To do that, I'm just going to right-click the Views folder, and down at the Smart Client Software Factory context-sensitive menu, I now have a couple options for adding different types of views. So I'm going to select Add View with Presenter. Let's call this view the Asset Listing View. And I'll go ahead and create a folder for this view as well, and I'll click Finish. And so now SCSF is going to generate my primary view for this module. And a view is basically comprised up of a user control, an interface to that user control, and a presenter, which is kind of like your controller in an MVC style situation. So let's set up our main user control. So I'm going to just double click that and open it in the designer. And the control we're going to be using on here is actually the Rad grid view. So I'm going to scroll down to the Telerik controls, and I'll select a Rad grid view and drag that out into the designer. And I'm going to dock this, and let's set a data source on it as well. So here in the Choose Data Source option, I'm going to just click that drop down and select Add Project Data Source. And our data source is going to be an object. And I've actually created an object previous to this called Asset, and I've stuck that inside of the infrastructure.interface project under the business entities namespace. So I'm going to select that and click Finish. And now our grid has been updated. I'm just going to open up the property builder real quick and expand these columns a little bit so they look a little nicer. Click OK. And I'm also going to disable adding on the Rad grid view because I want users to have to use my menu options to add items to this Rad grid view. And now I can click Save, and down here below also, if you haven't noticed, it's created an asset binding source for me. So our next step is going to be to expose this asset binding source to the presenter through our interface, which is this file right here. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up now, and I'll paste a quick code snippet in here. And I'll go ahead and resolve that. So as you can see, it's just a property for that asset binding source. And if we view the source code for the central user control for this view, at the top, it actually has that interface declared on it, but it has not yet been implemented. So I'm going to go ahead and implement that now by right-clicking it and selecting Implement Interface. And here in this method, I'm just going to return the asset binding source. So I'll go ahead and paste in some code to do that. And now that we've exposed the binding source, let's go ahead and take a look at our presenter. And the presenter is what's going to control the information that is displayed on our view. So if I open that up, the first thing I'm going to need to do is to subscribe to the asset service that I showed you earlier. And once again, the asset service is the service that gives me all of the asset data I need to display in the Rad grid view. So I'm going to come down here and paste in some code. And here's the subscription to that service. I'm just going to resolve this real quick. And as you can see, it's of the iAsset service type, the interface to the service that we talked about earlier. And it also has this service dependency attribute on top of it. And this service dependency actually goes out and retrieves the iAsset service that we've declared inside of the infrastructure.module project. And it knows exactly what to retrieve because we've specified the particular interface of that service. So now that we have this property has been fully initialized, or it will be fully initialized once the project is up and running, so we can actually start using it right away. So the next step we're going to take is to bind the data retrieved from the asset service to our data source. And I can do that here in the onViewReady method. And this is the first method that gets called after our view is created and initialized. So I'm going to paste in some code here. And all this code is doing is once again just retrieving the assets from the asset service and setting them on the data source of our asset binding source. So our next step for this process is to actually display the view inside of our RadTab workspace on our main layout. To do that, I'm going to actually do that inside of modulecontroller.cs. So I'll go ahead and open that up now. And once again, it actually contains this add views method that it's calling, and that's where we're going to add our view to that workspace. So I'm going to paste in another line of code and resolve a few things. So what this line of code is basically doing is it's calling the show view and workspace method, which is actually a method on the module controller. And it takes a generic type, and that type you just specify the view that you want it to create, and then you specify the workspace that you want it to show up in, which in this case is left workspace because that's the name of the RadTab workspace on our main layout. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and let's check it out and see if everything works. So I'm going to click Run, and the build succeeded, so the application should be up here in a second. A couple more seconds, it'll be up. And oh no, we've run into another problem. I was expecting this to happen. Obviously my acting is not very good. So what problem occurred here? Our view is not showing up in our RadTab workspace. So let's go ahead and fix our view so that it shows up inside of there. So I'm going to go to the views folder here and open up our asset listing view once again. And basically the reason that our view did not show up is because the RadTab workspace actually needs you to describe how you want your view to be displayed within it. I need to describe to it, I need to tell it what the title of the tab is going to be, I need to tell it if I'm going to be visible or not. It needs this information to be able to display my view. And to do that, there's actually a control here in our toolbox under the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit section called the RadTab Smart Part Info. And this is the object that describes how this view should be displayed. So I'm going to drag that out and let's take a look at its properties. So I want this view to be visible. I also want it to be enabled. And let's also give this a title. Let's call this the Assets tab. So I'll click Save once again. And one more thing that you need to be aware of is if we view the code behind for this particular view, the SCSF has actually generated code for us for that particular smart part. And this code is actually part of the iSmartPart Info Provider interface. But the SCSF has a few quirks every now and then, and this is one of them. It forgets to add that interface to your view, so we need to go ahead and add that manually. So I'm just going to add iSmartPart Info Provider. And let's close these files out, and we'll try running our application one more time. And the build succeeded, so it should be up here in a second. Couple more seconds to go. And here's our application. And now that we're using the SmartPart Info Provider, our view has shown up inside of the workspace, and it's inside of the Assets tab. And It's also retrieved data from the service and set it on our binding source, so we now have some pre-populated data here to work with. So our next step, let's take a look at our presentation once again. The next step we're going to take is to extend the UI extension sites. To do this, we're going to be creating commands and command handlers, and we're also going to extend the Rad menu and the Rad tool strip on our main layout. So let's hop back over to Visual Studio and expand our project a little bit. So the first step we need to take is to define some names for our commands. To do that, we can set that up here in our constants folder, and what these files are actually just string named constants for command names, events, UI extension sites, and workspaces in our projects. And since these are commands, we're going to put them in the command names CS file. So I'll go ahead and open that up, and I'm going to paste in some code here. So here are my two commands that I'm going to be using, the add asset command and the remove asset command. One for adding assets to my grid view and one for removing them. And our next step we need to take is to implement command handlers for these commands inside of our view that's going to be utilizing them. So to do that, let's go ahead and go to our views folder, back to the asset listing view, and we're going to do that inside of the asset listing view presenter. So I'm going to right click that and select view code, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of it here and paste in some more code. And I'm going to resolve a couple things real quick. So here are our two command handlers. And what a command handler is basically the executor of a particular command. So when this command gets called somewhere else in our application, this is the code that's going to be actually this is the code that's actually going to be called when that command gets called. And so basically a command handler method looks pretty much like this every time. It has to be a public method, and its signature must be an object sender and an event args e. It doesn't actually get past any event arguments, and you can't pass it any event arguments. So you should just make sure that you leave this specific property event args e. And for our command handler, we've actually specified that this method is a command handler by using the command handler attribute. And it's a command handler for the add asset command, which we've specified the string name for in our command names file. And the same goes for remove asset. It's a command handler for the string name remove assets as we specified in our command names file. So the next step we need to take is to extend our UI extension sites to invoke our commands. So I'm going to save this, and let's hop over to modulecontroller.cs. And inside of modulecontroller.cs, once again, we have the extend menu method and the extend toolstrip method. And these are the two methods that we use to extend our UI extension sites. So let's take care of extend menu first. So I'm going to paste some code in here. And I'm going to resolve a couple things real quick. So what this code is doing is basically this first block right here is creating a Rad menu item, and it's specified the name of that menu item to be assets. So this is our root level menu item. And since it's our root level menu item, it's the menu item we want to extend our Rad menu with. So to do that, we've retrieved the UI extension sites collection from the work item property of our module controller class that we're currently working in. And from the UI extension sites collection, I've specified that I want the main menu UI extension site using its string name constant. And to that, I've called the add method, and I've specified that Rad menu item that we've just created. And now this has been added to our Rad menu, and that UI extension site has been extended. So the next steps, or the next two blocks of code, are actually children menu items of that top level asset menu item, and they don't actually have to be added to the UI extension site. If they get added to this asset menu item, they're automatically part of it and part of the menu. But the different thing about these two items is they're actually going to be our command invokers. So for this first menu item, the Add Asset menu item, I've actually retrieved the commands collection from the work item on this module controller. And from the commands collection, I've specified the add asset command as the command I want to use. And on that, I've called add invoker. And I've specified this menu option. And to the right of that, I've specified the event that I want to invoke this command. And the event name here actually has to be the string name of the event. And in this case, it's the click event that I want to invoke that command. And the same case goes for the remove asset option. I've retrieved the commands collection from work item, and on that I'm using the remove asset string name to retrieve that from the collection. And I've called add invoker using the remove asset menu item, and I want the click event to invoke that command. So that's our Rad Menu extension code. Let's extend the tool strip now. So I'm going to paste some more code in. And this code is doing pretty much exactly the same thing as the menu code was doing. Here in the first section, it's just creating the tool strip item, which acts as the container for our two buttons that we're creating below. And this is what we use to extend our UI extension site. So from the UI extension sites collection, we've retrieved the main toolbar, and I simply call add on that and specify the item that we've just created. And so these two blocks of code, once again, are our two command invokers. So for this first one, it's the add asset button. So this, to set up the command invoker, I've retrieved the add asset command from the commands collection, and I've called add invoker and specified this button, and I've specified that I want the click event to issue this command. And the same thing goes again once more for the remove asset button. I'm just using the remove asset command, and again I've specified the click event. So let's go ahead and test this out now and see how it works. So I'm going to close those files out and we'll click run. And our application should be up here in a few seconds. A couple more seconds to go. And here's our application once again. And as you can see now, we have an assets menu option and the Rad Menu UI extension site, and the toolbar has also been extended with a couple of options. When I click add asset, it's invoking that command on the presenter of our asset listing view, and it's adding new items to our Rad grid view. And when I click remove asset, it removes those items. And the same thing goes for the assets menu. It's actually just calling the same exact code because it's using the same exact command as the toolbar. So let's hop back over to the presentation one more time. The next and final step in this project that we're going to take is to create some event publications and subscriptions. And in doing this, I'm actually going to use a module that I've previously created called the Asset Details module. And this module just displays information pertaining to the currently selected asset item in the Rad grid view. And so let's hop over there now and set that up. So here I am once again in Visual Studio. And since I've previously created the Asset Details module, I'm just going to go ahead and right-click Modules and select Add Existing Project. And inside of here, I'm going to select the Asset Details folder, and I'll select the Asset Details project and open that, and it's now included in my application. I need to take one more step here. Since I didn't use the SCSF to generate this, it hasn't been added to the profile catalog XML in my shell project, so I need to open that up, and I'm going to open up profile catalog.xml. And down here where it's adding my different assembly files for my modules, I'm going to paste in another quick snippet of code. And this code just specifies the compiled assembly of the asset details project as part of my overall project. And when I hit run, it's going to automatically create that work item for that project and call run on its module controller. So I'll close that out. And let's take a look at the asset details project now. Or actually, let's take a look at the asset listing project first. The problem we're in, I'm going to run it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to show you exactly why we need event publications and subscriptions in this specific situation. So it's about up. So here our application is running once again, and as you can see, a new tab has shown up. This is the Details tab. And this tab, these two text boxes are supposed to contain the information for the currently selected item in our RadGrid view. So if I switch back and select a different item, as you can see, it's not getting updated. And the reason it's not getting updated is because the Details view has no idea what item I'm selecting in this RadGrid view. We actually need to tell it what item I'm selecting. And we're going to do this through the use of an event publication. So let's close that out. And let's add that event publication to our asset listing project. So I'm going to expand that and come back over here to the asset listing view. And if we select the asset listing view presenter, I'm going to right click that, and down here in the Smart Client Factory context menu, once again, I have two new items that I can use. I'm going to select Add Event Publication to add an event publication to that presenter. So let's call this event publication asset selected. And I've created some event arguments previous to this, and I've placed those inside of the infrastructure.interface file, and those are the asset selected event args. And these event arguments just basically are a holder for whatever particular asset is currently selected. So I'm going to click Finish now, and the SCSF is going to generate some more code for us. So let's open up the presenter now and take a look at the code that was generated. Here at the top is a typical event handler, but the special thing to note about this is that it actually contains this event publication attribute. And this is what defines this as an event publication. And it specified the asset selected constant string that it's also created for us as the name of this event. And this event is global, so we can access it pretty much anywhere in our entire application. And down at the bottom, it's also generated an onSelected method for us that invokes that event based on the event arguments that we pass into it. So let's call this method with our currently selected item. To do that, I'm just going to add an event handler that detects when the current item on our binding source has changed. So I'm going to paste in some code to do that for us. And so there is our event subscription. And now I'm going to paste in some code for that event. So here's the code for that event. When the current item on our binding source gets changed, it's going to call the onAssetSelected method, and it's going to create a new event argument for that contains the asset specific, the currently selected asset. I'm going to go ahead and resolve this object right here. And so now we have our event publication. The asset listing view is actually broadcasting to everyone who wants to listen that an item has been selected. So I'm going to close this out now, and let's switch over to the asset details view. The asset details view works pretty much the same way as our other view. It contains two text boxes bound to a binding source that we can access through our interface. So here in our interface is an asset binding source, and this is what we're going to bind the asset to once we receive it. So let's add the event subscription. To do that, I'm going to right-click the Asset Details View Presenter, and down at the bottom, I'm going to select the Smart Client Factory menu option once again, and now I will select Add Event Subscription. And from my drop-down box, I can see that there is an Asset Selected event now, and I also need to update the event arguments once again to be those that will be passed, and those are available in infrastructure.interface under Asset Selected Event Args. Select that and click Finish. And let's take a look at the code that was generated for this. So here in the Asset Details View Presenter at the very bottom, the SCSF has generated an event handler method that contains an attribute for event subscription on top of it. And that tells CAB that this particular event is to receive calls from that particular event publication, the Asset Selected event publication. And it's also, you can specify the thread that you want it to run on, and by default I have it running on the user interface thread. So let's paste some code in here now. And this code is actually just going to bind the data source to the asset that gets passed. So now that we have that, let's run the application one final time and see if it works. Everything compiled, so let's see if it works successfully now. Should be up here in a few more seconds. A couple more seconds to go. And here's our application once again. So now when I select one of these items, it's going to signal that event publication. And since the details view is now subscribing to it, it's been updated to contain that information. So as I switch back and forth between these, you'll see that it's updating based on the currently selected item. And that's basically our entire application we're going to create. So I'm going to hop back over to the presentation now. So now that you've created your very first SCSF CAB TCEK enabled application, here's a few resources you can use to get started on your own. The first link here at the top is the link to the Codeplex website for the Smart Client Software Factory, and that's what we've been using this entire time. That's what you saw. That's where you saw those context menus that generated all that code for us, and that's what actually generated that entire huge project for us and all of those little modules. And that's available at codeplex.com/smartclient. And if you're going to use the RadControls with your SCSF CAB-based projects, you can retrieve the TCEK from Codeplex as well at telericcab.codeplex.com. And I've also written several tutorials, and I think I've pretty much covered everything that's available with the TCEK. And those tutorials are available on my blog at blogs.teleric.com/RobertShoemate. I've also made several videos that correspond to those blog entries, and those are available at tv.teleric.com. So with that, I would like to conclude this presentation, and thanks for watching, and thanks for your interest in the SCSF and the Telerik CAB Enabling Kit.